If you've submitted a question for the Ask Me Anything video, then please stay tuned. I'm answering all your questions next. Hello, you're very welcome to Shane's Queenside, and today is the Ask Me Anything video, which has been long awaited on this channel. Basically, this is where people who are on my website, Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube channel, whatever you want, have submitted questions to me, and it's on this video that we answer those questions. And first up, we have Stuart Heaton, and Stuart says, thoughts on Friends Will Be Friends coming between We Will Rock You and We Are The Champions on the final few gigs? It was a no from me. So if you're not familiar with this, on the Magic Tour in 1986, Queen had a new album out, which was called A Kind of Magic, and on some of the gigs they had We Will Rock You interrupted by Friends Will Be Friends and then We Are The Champions. Now, historically, Queen used to always do We Will Rock You and We Are The Champions because they released those singles as a double A-sided single, and even to this day in the USA, those songs are played back to back. Queen would have ended all of their shows with We Will Rock You followed by We Are The Champions. But on the Magic Tour, as I said, they interrupted that with Friends Will Be Friends. Now, for me, I don't think it worked. For a start, it's a different key. So We Are The Champions would end on an A major, and as far as I recall, Friends Will Be Friends starts on a G, and it just sounds a bit unusual when it's done like that. And I can't remember if they did even change the key of the song for the Magic Tour. They may have. And then you have We Are The Champions then starting on a G minor to a C minor. And again, it just doesn't work. You're hearing in your head, you're looking for that starting note of We Are The Champions, and it doesn't come. And for all of us who've been following Queen for all the years, and we hear We Will Rock You, we know We Are The Champions are coming next. And I would agree with Stuart, it was a no from me also. So question 2 comes from Rihanna. Rihanna asks, what was the most difficult Queen song for you to learn to play for the first time? Now, I've been learning Queen songs since 1993. I started off with probably the hardest one, which is Bohemian Rhapsody, purely because I had access to it from the greatest hits. And even then, as a poor student, I didn't really have the money to be buying the sheet music. And so I started learning the song myself and actually trying to figure out what the chords were. And to me, it sounded tricky because I didn't have enough musical knowledge at the time to understand what was going on. And we will have at some point later on this year a full Bohemian Rhapsody breakdown from a musical perspective, which I can do now, 30 years on, having learned all of the Queen songs since. But I do have a few songs that are still up there as regards being difficult to learn. So let's take a look at the list that I have compiled so far, and I'll give you some reasons behind why those songs are difficult to play. So these are all of the Queen songs that Queen have released, and from that a number of songs will certainly jump out as being ones that are tricky to learn, either from a musical perspective or simply from the fact that they are complex in their arrangement. Like Bohemian Rhapsody has a lot of different key changes, the time signature changes that you've got to be aware of. So looking at the ones that I would still think to this day are tricky to learn, if you're starting off learning Queen songs, I would certainly think that in my top 10, I would have, starting off, for example, A Winter's Tale, purely because the chording and the arrangements are just tricky to get into your head as being, learn the chords and so on. Barcelona, again, a very tricky song from the point of view of there's so much going on. You've got to remember a lot of complex chords. Bring Back That Leroy Brown, a very, very fast key changes in there. Sorry, very fast chord changes in Bring Back Leroy Brown. Death on Two Legs, you have that right hand, left hand independence problem where you're trying to play one thing on left hand and a different tempo on the right. Exercise in Free Love or Insenio, again, just learning those chords can be tricky. Guide Me Home, very similar. Love of My Life, the instrumental section in the middle. Freddie even said he forgot how to play it at one point. My Melancholy Blues has a G major in there into an E flat key, and that can be tricky because you're not expecting it. Millionaire's Waltz, again, lots of little bits you've got to remember. And The Miracle changes key quite a lot, and You Take My Breath Away again. that's a song that you have to learn that off. It's one of those ones you just learn it. It's not overly tricky, but when you're learning it for the first time, it can throw you. So out of that list, I would certainly put the Miracle up there, Barcelona for sure, and purely from a speed perspective, bring back that Leroy Brown, and then the left hand, right hand independence for Death on Two Legs. And if you are stuck on Death on Two Legs and you cannot maintain the staccato with the bass hand, cross your hands over. And it's a lot easier. So you're playing the staccato with a different hand, and you can maintain the tempo with a different one. It actually does work. So if you're having problems, just cross your hands over, it will work. So that's a little tip there for you. So hopefully that answers your question, Rihanna, as regards the most difficult songs to learn if you're starting off. And then we go to Somerset in the UK with Xander, who is actually Wild Wild Southwest Child on YouTube. And you should also look up River Axe Media as well if you are a business looking for a video. That's Xander's business along with his friend. And Xander asks, what is the most challenging Queen song to perform live? No backing tracks allowed. Now, for a start, we don't use backing tracks with Celebrating Queen or the associated Freddies show. As regards keeping like the musicality going, occasionally we might put in a drum beat. So for example, on the Freddy show, we do put in the drum beat for Days of Our Lives, because we don't have a drummer for that show. It's a very intimate, smaller show, 3-man show, keys, vocals and guitar. So on that instance, a backing track is not really a backing track, it's just simply a few drums. But as regards the most challenging Queen song to perform live, I would put Love of My Life up there, because if you're listening to the album, the Night at the Opera album, there's a very complex, intricate piano section in there. And I don't do that live, purely because on rehearsal, I find I'm tripping over myself, and I don't want to go out on stage live and kind of go, right, am I going to nail this or am I not? So I actually use Brian May's version. So if you listen to Wembley, for example, Brian May plays Love of My Life on guitar, and he plays his own version of that. So I learned that on guitar first, and then I actually transferred it on to piano. So during our live shows, when we're doing Love of My Life, I play the exact same way that Freddie plays on the piano for the album version, for the verses and so on. But when it comes to the instrumental, I actually put in Brian's version, transposed to the album key. So that is one that I would say is a tricky one to play live. As regards other songs, Let Me Live, for example, is not too difficult, but there's a few little chords here and there, and if you forget them, it throws you and you could very easily lose where you are. It's just 2 or 3 chords. I think there's a section which it says it's a long, hard struggle around that point. And it's one of those ones, if you don't remember those chords, you're in a sticky situation. So I've occasionally put them onto my set list. On Kronos, my Kronos here, there's a set list section, so you can actually navigate through all your instruments and so on. But within the instrumentation, you can have little notes saying, don't forget it's D minor, A minor for the bridge, that sort of thing. But really, it's a case that when we're doing our shows live, our set list is rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed to a point where it's not, can I get it right? It's rehearsed to a point where you can't get it wrong. So all of the shows we do, I'm going out there and I'm playing knowing that there's no songs I can't play. So when it comes to playing live, there's no real challenging song that we would play live, because we rehearse so much. Like I would probably put in a month's rehearsal before a show, probably an hour a day, sometimes 2 hours a day as we approach the date. And the guys in the States would be doing the same thing. They're all pros. They are really, really great at what they do. So when we go and we do a 1-day rehearsal before a show, we nail all the songs straight away, but there's no real issues. There might be a thing, but where a count issue, like how many counts is there before we get to this section, or if there's a gap, is it 4 beats or 6 beats coming in here, that sort of thing. But if I did have to play Love of My Life as it was on the album, let's just say we did a full Night at the Opera album show and we had to play it exactly as it was, that would be tricky to play the Love of My Life instrumental as it is on the album. I can do it, but my problem is, can I do it consistently, and can I do it the night of the show without tripping over? It's like a tongue twister, but for your fingers. So yeah, there's a few things there. I hope that answers your question, but we get to a point in the set list and we get to a point in the shows, but where we don't have challenges going out. We know as we're walking out there are no issues. We're kind of going, oh, will I play that properly tonight or will I not? It's you work on everything before the show so you don't have those issues, and that just helps you perform well. So there's other things as well. You're trying to perform to the crowd, and you're trying to engage, and you're trying to engage with each other. So if you're worried about a chord coming up or a progression or a run or a fill coming up, you don't want that. So you get to a point where you're going out kind of going, yeah, this is going to be a great show and we'll get it done, and you can enjoy the show then because you don't have those challenges. So I hope that answers your question, Xander, and a very good question indeed. Now moving on to question number 4, and this comes in from Oliver Lindell. And Oliver says, do any Queen songs take you back to a certain point in your life? And if so, what, where, and why are those specific things when you hear that song? So probably going back as far as I can remember, my cousin was a huge Queen fan, and I do remember listening to Greatest Hits when he had purchased the album for the first time, and he played me Bohemian Rhapsody, and he said, what do you think of this? And I was thrown by the fact it was so unusual as a song. He played me Fat Bottom Girls, and as 8-year-olds we were laughing at the name Fanny because over here that's a funny name to have. It means something different in the USA, but that's neither here nor there. So that brings me back to that point, which is around 81, 82. In 84, I remember being in my kitchen playing on my newly acquired Christmas gift, which was an Oric 148K computer. At the time, back in 1984, it was rare for computers to be in the home. Everyone had the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum and so on around that, but I actually had a book of games where you had to type in all the code into the console, and on the radio came Radio Gaga, and for me, that when I hear that song, it brings me right back to March 1984, when that song came on the radio. I think the synthesizers at the start with the arpeggio bass and the vocoder of radio and so on, it was so new for us to hear something that's so complex and so interesting at the time. So that brings me back to there. There's a few other areas, like for example, I remember getting one of those Now Greatest Hits compilation things, that's what I call music, in 86, and A Kind of Magic was on it. I remember that. I remember the Highlander movie. Again, Queen was huge on that. I remember watching that. So there are certain points in my life where I do remember Queen songs having some impact. And now when I hear them, I can sometimes remember the era and the time that it was. And Oliver, I hope that answers your question. But yeah, there's certainly Queen has played a lot of moments in my life. Even though back then I wasn't a Queen fan, I wasn't actually a Queen fan until probably the early 90s when my cousin gave me Queen 2. The same guy who played me Greatest Hits in his bedroom back in 81, like 12 years later, he gave me Queen 2, and it was kind of going, wow, that's amazing. And I was hooked from that point on. So yeah, great question. Thank you very much. Now, we have an email this time from Frank Macy, and Frank said, I saw you're doing an Ask Me Anything series and I have 2 questions for you. Do you follow a process or ritual before performance to get rid of nerves and performance anxiety? And question 2, do you use in-ear monitors or wedges? Thanks very much. Looking forward to the video, Frank. So Frank, thank you very much for that question. A very, very good question. As regards performances and rituals and performance anxiety and so on, I don't really have a ritual. I don't really have a process I go through. Maybe I'll look at the set list. For example, there are certain songs which require me to perform an action. Even though I'm playing the keyboards, it might be a sample that might need to be played. For example, the bells on Bicycle Race, I've got to trigger that manually. Sometimes I link it into a key on the keyboard to make it easy. On the synth here, the Kronos allows you to actually embed a synth patch. So for example, a WAV file can be assigned to a certain key on the keyboard, or I can use my laptop. So I look through the set list and just be aware of those small little things. As regards performance anxiety, I don't really get anxiety before I go out on stage. I'm looking forward to the show. So there's kind of a buzz more than anything else, but I don't really have worries or fears going out on stage. It's not something that I do. Maybe back maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, when I was less musically knowledgeable, if you call it that word, or even experienced. Lack of experience can certainly play a role in anxiety because you're not sure if you're confident enough. But at this stage, you know, I've done I've done 3 Las Vegas shows, I've played in many venues, I've done festivals. You don't get, after a certain point, you kind of go, I've done all that, I don't need to be worried about what I'm doing. If I hadn't rehearsed, maybe I might be more anxious. So for example, there was one show I did and I was very sick for the week before, so I didn't get enough time on a keyboard here back in Ireland to rehearse properly, and I was probably a bit trepidatious about going out, if that's the right word to use there. But as regards going out on stage without rehearsing, I would never not rehearse, but I would always like to have a certain level of rehearsal to be totally confident going out. But yeah, I don't really get nerves. As regards in-ear monitors or wedges, I do like using in-ear monitors. It's something I was introduced by our one of our musicians actually gave me advice on which ones to get. That was Carl Archambault, and a fantastic keyboard player and vocalist, and he gave me advice to get these, which are the ZS10 Pro, and they're very, very good and very, very easy to wear and very handy, because you can control the volume of your mix that you have coming into you. You need a power pack that sits beside you or on you, whatever you want to do, and that these plug into that, and that then plugs into the house system. So that's that. Wedges I will use as well. I mean, I can use both. I have no problems using anything at all, because my rehearsal process here is I use headphones and I run an audio mix from my laptop through a USB interface into the headphones. So my keyboard and my audio comes through on my headphones. So technically I'm doing in-ear monitors here during my rehearsals, but I can use both, and that's a very, very good question to ask. Thank you very much, Frank. So the next question comes in from Jack Daniel 0505 on Instagram. Certainly check him out. He's from my hometown of Waterford, and he's a very good drummer. So if you're looking for some nice drum covers, I would certainly recommend checking out Jack Colbert's Instagram account, because he actually does a lot of Queen as well, so definitely check him out. And Jack has the following question: why would you think Queen turned down Spike on all of their releases? Now, there's probably 2 reasons for this, Jack. Spike is not officially a Queen member. He is a session musician that plays along with them, and sometimes during concerts you probably would be getting a mix that might not be the same level you might do in the studio. So maybe when they're pre-processing this for a proper release of a mastered concert footage, for example, they might think that Spike is probably a bit too heavy in the mix, and they bring it down because they want to make a better and more even flow of audio. Especially now we have things like Atmos, and we've got things like better stereo sound bars, for example, with 5 different speakers. Maybe they're trying to get a mix that works for more of those systems. When it was mixed originally back in the day, we simply had mono and stereo with quite poor speakers when you consider what the TVs had at that time. So yeah, I think maybe over time the mixes have changed, and that might be the reason. There might be 2 reasons there: Spike not being a member of Queen perhaps, and also with the way mixing has developed over all of the years, when considering like the mixes would be from 1986. Maybe those options have changed over the years. Maybe even Queen's opinions of how they sounded at that time have changed as well. So the next question comes in from Instagram, and a user called Digsy_, and this question is: what inspired you to make the website? Well, as I said before, my cousin had given me Queen 2 back in 1993, and I was hooked on Queen since then. I started learning more of the songs on piano, and as being a student, I didn't have the finances to go out and buy every single Queen book that I might have wanted to have, as regards getting the chords and all those. So I used to listen on the stereo, listen with headphones with the piano, and work out the chords, and I used to write down the chords that I thought the songs were playing. So over time I had a large number of these sheets of paper with chords and lyrics on them, and I started typing them into the computer. And in a very, very infantile internet, if you can understand, it's not what we had today. Websites were rare. It was 1998. I had a very, very basic account on, which is now Aircom. It was TINet at that time. I created the website, and I saw some interest. There was people coming on, they were finding the website. And then I registered my own domain name in 2001. And around 2002, I started putting all the Queen stuff on this new domain name, and I started building a repertoire of all my songs, kind of a repository of all the chords I had learned and transcribed to that date. So suddenly I had interest again from people coming on the site, finding the chords, and my traffic was growing. So at that point I decided to create a certain section on my website called Shane's Queen site. So it has changed over all the years, but the core of it has always been those chords and those transcriptions that I made in the early days. And since then I've added to it. I get about 6,000 to 9,000 people a month on the site, which is not too bad at all. So what inspired me basically was the starting process that I had of learning the chords, and the fact that back in the day, the chords on the internet, there was no such thing as typing in tabs and so on. It was quite rare to find them at that time. But really it was a case that I started doing all the chords, and then I started seeing the interest. So I just built it from the fact that I want to interact with people around the world who loved Queen and wanted to find more of their music. So thank you very much for your question. So that's the last of the questions from users, but I did try and see what would happen if I asked AI the same question, and what would AI ask me from the point of view of questioning. So I said, I'm a musician who specializes in the music of the band Queen. What question would you ask me? So it asked me the following: as a Queen specialist, I'd like to ask you, beyond the well-known hits, which deep cut Queen song do you believe best showcases the musical ability and versatility, and what specific elements makes it so remarkable? I definitely think that Queen 2 has embryonic feeling of where Queen are heading to. March of the Black Queen, for example, the very end of that, you could nearly mirror that with the ending of Bohemian Rhapsody, with the way the guitar is played and the way it slows down into a rhyme. There's definitely things going on there, and the multi-tracking of the vocals. They're trying stuff out. They're trying new things around that time, especially then going into Killer Queen, all the harmonies and the layering in there. Deep cut March of the Black Queen I would put in there. White Queen, one of my favorite songs. From the first album I would put in Liar, Doing All Right. Those two songs are phenomenal. Great King Rat, Ogre Battle. They're songs that people don't realize are actually Queen. But I love doing that. I love actually giving somebody a song saying, did you know this is Queen? And they're kind of going, wow, that's amazing. I just thought they were like, the greatest hits was what they were most famous for. But yeah, I do think there's a lot of deep cuts out there that people don't realize are so good that they could have been on a greatest hits. Spread Your Wings, another song that should have been on greatest hits for sure. So yeah, there's deep cuts out there, and I think it varies for everybody. And it varies for me as well. There's some days that I would love to show somebody Someday One Day, for example. That's a lovely song, beautiful song. Brian singing on that is phenomenal. And then you have the fun songs, for example, like Lazing on Sunday Afternoon, Seaside Rendezvous, Millionaire's Waltz. Again, you never hear those being played on the radio, but yet they showcase what Queen can do. From the point of view of that, like even in Lazing on Sunday Afternoon, it's in E flat, and then suddenly that E flat jumps up to an A major chord for the guitar solo, which is a whole tritone change, and that's the largest key change you can have in music, and yet they do it there. They did the same thing in Bohemian Rhapsody. They go from E flat to an A as well, so it goes from the E flat during the guitar solo into the A for the opera section, tritone change. So they're all the time trying to be different than bands who are simply doing a 3-chord trick, that sort of thing. Queen were never that. So yeah, deep cuts, there's so many out there, and that was a very good question from AI, and I thought there's a lot that you could even discuss on that question alone. So if you have any comments yourself on any of the questions we've done so far, please leave a comment below, and I will reply to all your comments. So let's take a look at the next AI question which was asked. So this again was another AI question. If you could have witnessed one Queen live performance in person, which would it be and why? Considering the band's energy, set list, and the historical significance of the event. Well, I would pick three. I would pick the Hammersmith Odeon, the Christmas Eve concert. I would pick Montreal in 1981, and I would pick Queen live at Wembley. They're my three because all of those have the eras that I love most. So, for example, the early Queen, the one where you're having all of the first 3 or 4 albums being played, to hear that at that Christmas Eve concert would be amazing. Then we move on to Montreal, which was the 24th and 25th of November 1981. The performance was amazing, and some people say actually Milton Keynes was better, and if my time traveling adventures could only give me either Montreal or Milton Keynes live at the Bowl, I'd take either. To me they're similar. I just prefer Montreal because of the way it was filmed. It was filmed very, very high quality. But yes, Live at the Bowl is another stellar performance by Queen. But I'm not a huge fan of the hot space tracks, so therefore that's why I'm kind of edging towards Montreal. And then of course Queen live at Wembley, which was the first Queen live concert I ever saw on VHS. My uncle gave it to me back in 1988 after it was shown on a Channel 4 program called The Tube, and I actually learned off the whole show. So when I want to relax here, I will actually put on the Queen live at Wembley and play along with the whole show, and time flies by, and it's very relaxing to do. So that was the second AI question that I got. And one final question then from AI is the following. So given your specialization in Queen's music, and particularly on piano sections, consider the evolution of Queen's sound and Freddie Mercury's piano playing. How could you describe the shift in complexity and style of his piano arrangements for the early albums like Queen 2, or the later work like The Game and Innuendo, providing examples and songs to illustrate your points, and discussing notable technical challenges and stylistic influences you have observed? So there's a lot you could even discuss on that. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth in this. I will simply say that early Queen has the best piano. So the earlier you go back, you have much more technical and classically inspired piano, rather than looking back towards, for example, The Game. There's not too many challenges on The Game as grad playing piano for Queen. But if you look, for example, at March of the Black Queen, if you look at Fairy Fella's Masterstroke, the harpsichord in that, it's fast. Also looking at My Fairy King, that's fast, it's challenging. The classical section within Love of My Life, playing songs like Millionaire's Waltz, Blazing on Sunday Afternoon. Really, he was extremely talented, and he challenged himself as regards playing not simply chords, but playing beautiful arpeggios and sweeping runs. You Take My Breath Away is a beautiful song. So early Queen has, as far as I'm concerned, the best piano. And later Queen, I think Freddie wanted to run around the stage more, so therefore his Queen piano interludes were far and few between. So therefore there was a lot less piano songs on the later albums than there were on the earlier albums. Of course, synths took over, so you have a lot more synth-based tracks. If you look at the recording of One Vision, in the background you can see a Yamaha DX7. Fantastic synthesizer. I wish I had one here, because I just love that synth. Luckily enough, I had a few days with one back in 1988. I got a loan of one from a friend, and the sound was phenomenal. I know you can get sounds from the Kronos, which are FM synthesis, and it approximates it. And of course we have DX, and I did a video before on that. I'll link it in the top corner as well. Just at this point, you can take a look at how you can perform the sound from Once and Live Forever on the Magic Tour, and that's from a DX7 emulator that I downloaded. But coming back to this question of Queen's sound and particularly Freddie Mercury's piano, definitely the first 5 or 6 albums, there is some really, really good piano playing on those, and they're definitely my favourite albums from the piano perspective, which is where I started, of course, learning Queen songs. So that's the answer I would give for that question. So I hope you enjoyed the Ask Me Anything video today, and if you have any questions yourself, feel free to leave them in the comments, or if you want to reply yourself to any of the questions we've had on this particular episode, please do leave a comment. I reply to all the comments, as you know, and I appreciate you coming on to watch this video. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel and like the video, please. It helps what I do here on the channel. And in a few moments, we will have some recommended videos and you can watch some more of my content. We will have more music tutorials, piano tutorials by Queen in the next few weeks. And I will also have another Queen quiz, which will be the Queen 2 quiz, coming up very, very shortly. And thank you very much for all those who have played the 2 quizzes to date. And with that in mind, thank you very much for visiting this video today and the long-awaited Ask Me Anything sessions. My name is Shane MacDonald and you're watching Shane's Queen Site, and thank you very much for visiting. Have a great day.